Hi, I'm Jay Cohen, creator, writer of Astounding Tales. You can find me on Instagram on _Jake_Cohen and also read issue 0 at funnyfigs.com/astounding. And you are watching and listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Hi, I'm Raymond Griffith, artist of Astounding Tales, and you can find us everywhere it matters as Funny Figs or funnyfigs.com/astounding if you want to get a little taste of what the comic looks like. And you're watching and listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Good morning, afternoon, evening. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We're joined today by two very talented individuals. One of them has been on the show in the past, and we had a wonderful conversation about Astounding Tales issue 1, and of course, film history and a variety of other things as well, too. I'm not sure if I made it into the interview, which means you'll have to watch the past interview of this amazing guest. But we're joined by both the writer and the artist of the series. Today on Two Geeks Talking by Jake Cohen and Raymond Griffith. How are you both doing today?
Hello, I'm Jake. I am the writer of Astounding Tales, but more importantly, I am joined by my collaborator, Mr. Ray Griffith, the guy who brings it to life.
Oh, I'm doing excellently. Thank you so much for taking the time.
For those that don't know anything about yourselves as creative people, tell us who you are and what you're bringing to Two Geeks Talking.
I'm the writer, and this all got started way back in the before time during the pandemic. I had a 4-page script that I was sending, I was sending in 4-page submissions to 2000 AD. They had like aftershock submissions, like short 4-pagers with a twist at the end. And during the pandemic, they stopped accepting submissions. And with some of the fine money that the U.S. government was giving us to stay home, I used that to commission Mr. Ray Griffith. And that's how this whole romance started. And now we're on to issue 2. And that is very close to a completion, and hopefully soon we'll be kickstarting it and doing some other fun stuff too, promoting it. And kind of this is our step on our path towards promotion, to letting people know, aware that this comic book exists. And I guess, also thanks to Ray for, frankly, his hard work. I think, sometimes in different corners of the internet, people discuss kind of the division labor or who's more important, or, and this is not any false humility or anything like that, but Ray brings it to life. Like I always say, if I was left to my own devices, it would be like stick figures and dicks. Like that's what I can draw. And so it's not any false humility, and also I think, especially because cinema and like, visual storytelling is so popular and kind of the dominant kind of medium these days, that people like to use film analogies, and some people throw around the writer kind of being the director, and I would not subscribe to that at all. I would, in the way of a screenwriter, I'm the writer. I make a blueprint, but I wouldn't just call Ray the cinematographer, just the person shooting. I would call him the director too, because he depicts the images. And also in terms of my scripts, I write them very much like a screenplay. Like I'll put down panel breakdowns, but also those are not set in stone by any means, but I don't put camera angles. And that's the same thing in a movie script. That's left up to the director and the cinematographer. And I look at, I give kind of what's happening in this scene, and then Ray depicts the screen at the scene, and that includes the camera angles. So definitely, he'd be more so the director and the cinematographer in terms of the division and labor. I'm just the lowly writer in a cave. I come up with a dopey idea, but then he brings it to life, and oftentimes elevates these dopey ideas.
To say, I didn't know this was my directorial debut, but I appreciate.
Oh no, issue 0 was. This is your 3rd.
That's true. I just didn't know I had the title.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I think it's really that could be a debate for another day, but I think some people say in comic books, the writer is the director. I don't agree, unless like you are a writer artist. But whatever. That's a debate for another day. I don't agree with that analogy.
A debate to be had. But to get back to it, my origin is a little strange. I started out with art when I was 16. I started as a caricature artist at a local theme park. And, I did that for almost my entire adult life, eventually branching out to, run my own company. But the comics thing always came about because that's always something that I really wanted to do and just never knew how to break into. And finally, I just, it was like 2018 when I sat down and said, look, if you don't do it now, you're never actually going to do it. So you might as well just give it a shot. I think we were on like a Reddit, a subreddit for collaborating on comic books. And I saw this pitch. I was like, hey, that sounds kind of fun. Sent him a message and we've been working together ever since.
That's how I roped him in, and I'm never letting go.
That's what we talked about briefly in our first interview with Jake as well, because it was the art that was just incredible. And honestly, I think I used the giant turtle as the title image, as the background there, just because it was just so awesome. It's just like, just from a perspective. Say that 3 times fast. It's just amazing to see like size and depth and everything like that from being an artist, obviously, and a caricaturist. Those are 2 completely different styles. What was it about this script when you were working with Jake where you said, this is what I want to do, and this is how I can not only improve myself as an artist, but improve this comic as well?
Well, first, I want to say that, you'd be surprised at how applicable some of that caricaturing can be, because when you're talking about perspective, you're talking about things being bigger and smaller in relation to each other. And that's all caricature right there. You got huge hands, huge heads, tiny little bodies. I was well trained for it. But as to what attracted me to the script, like I said, it was just tight, action packed. It's, if you've read the comic, it very much speaks to that classic comic feel. Here is our characters, here's our adventure. We're ready. We understand it. We're moving forward. We waste no time in these comics.
In terms of like if someone, again, going to like a film example, it kind of Raiders is kind of the touchstone in terms of like it goes. Once the story happens, like it's very much nothing against modern comics. I'm a big believer that like every generation deserves their own stories. But in terms of like it's not decompressed story. We're not writing for the trades. There's not going to be like pages of like talking heads. Like this is like a visual storytelling. But also it's really neat. I feel at least like I loved, like you said, starting from issue 0, I fell in love with Ray's art. But in terms of like now issue 2, you do see the progress as well. Like he was awesome to start, but you definitely you see a progress. And like for me, I think that's, and I hope readers as well think that's you could definitely see the growth, and it's kind of cool. And also I don't know if this has anything to do with caricature artists, but Ray, you could speak to this, that I think especially in terms of comic book artists, Ray can depict like children and teens and adults all well. Like his kids just don't look like tiny shrunken adults. Like there's the famous like John Byrne instances where he draws babies and they're just like weird looking like adults with like misshapen heads, and it's like super bizarre. That like I think that's something that Ray right off does like super well, is that like they're not just different size humans, they're distinctively like, oh, that's recognizably a child, that is an adult, that is a teenager.
Didn't know if you want to add anything, Ray.
Yeah, I had one thing to say. So part of the process for creating issue 2 involved some life changes for me, so it took a little longer than we had hoped. And so you can actually see the evolution of my art in the issue itself. You go from page 1, which was drawn 2 years ago, and you go to the last page and you're like, wow, was this even drawn by the same guy? I mean, there's consistency, but at the same time, you're like, this is definitely a step up.
I think in the designs though of the we a lot of times not in issue 0 so much, but in 1 and 2 we kind of have like a cold open. And the design work of like the character design in issue 2, I think is really awesome. I think we introduced some really neat characters. But in general, like his characters, like you said, the turtle, I mean, obviously I want to give him something to work with. I don't want to be like completely vague, but on the other hand, that like hey man, like give him the ball and to run with it. And I think you see that in terms of the art, that like he's enjoying what he's putting down. And definitely with the character design, like, I do have some ideas in my head, but those are really largely right, especially in terms of like the monsters and stuff like that. And I know he digs like drawing that kind of stuff. So I try to kind of put in stuff that he enjoys drawing. I do apologize once again that there's some automobiles in there, but they're not highly referenced automobiles. I promise you could, but so I apologize for that, but I try to put in, and I think for any aspiring writers out there, I know you have that magnum opus in you, but try to, talk to your artist and like, what do you dig? Like, what blows your hair back? And then you get really cool fucking you get really cool like the giant turtle in Zero, when you kind of embrace your artists and kind of give them room to kind of express themselves and tell their story within the story.
As an artist, what is the most misunderstood aspect about the superhero genre in art that people who don't follow it misunderstand?
That's a good one.
That is a really good question. What is the most misunderstood? I'm gonna have to think about that.
Yeah. I'm glad he asked you that
maybe
one.
Maybe background art,
brainbusters.
That's, I guess, just the amount of time would be my immediate reaction to that. Like, nobody understands how much work these are unless they've actually tried to do it. I'm reminded of the time I listened to a nerdy podcast called Planet Money, where they tried to make a comic book one time. They thought they were going to get it done in 3 months, and then a year later it finally came out, and they're like, oh, this is really long and time consuming. I see now.
So then how do you speed up your process in terms of as an artist as well too? Because the reason why is I'm asking is I'm always curious from the technical standpoint, because you don't start off great. Obviously there's trial and error, but how have you improved yourself? Because you said life changes happened in this current issue that made you get better.
Well, the life changes didn't make me get better, but it did make the issue take longer. I think what made me get better was the fact that I had to take more time on each page due to those changes. Basically, I had to get a real job is what happened. I no longer am doing caricature. I do something very exciting called aircraft title research, which is just thrilling. But, because I was spending, instead of a couple days on a page, I was spending like a week or two looking at it. I would start to stop and pause and really think about what I was doing rather than just trying to get something on a page, taking more time with the backgrounds, using perspective lines, trying to create a real setting. That was what made the difference for me.
Are you still a traditional artist, or have you gone full-time into digital? Do you still dabble in either?
Completely digital. I don't even touch ink anymore. I just use Procreate. As soon as I got that tablet, everything changed.
Was it a large learning curve though?
Oh, not really. And that's what I like about it so much, because, I'd messed with tablets before, but primarily I was a traditional artist completely before then. All the characters I did were marker on paper, a little airbrushing. But I think that also helped get me ready for it, because it helped me make confident lines and helped me, know how to visualize what I'm putting on the page before I put it on there. Being able to visualize what you are trying to put on the page is what helps you create that image. If you can, have confident lines by practicing with something like a marker where you can't erase, you're going to start thinking ahead, going, okay, what do I actually want to do here? What does this need to look like? And when you can visualize that, it's much easier to put it on the paper, or, the digital paper as it is.
As an artist, though, everyone usually asks, what's the wisest piece of advice and what's the most BS piece of advice? But what is the second wisest piece of advice that you've received that has stuck with you in your career?
I think if I had to categorize them, I don't know if it's right up there at the second or the third, but probably one of the better pieces of advice I ever got was, if it doesn't look right, add more contrast. And that can mean a lot of things. It can be contrast in line weight. It can be contrast in colors. It can be contrast in, sizes of objects in the screen. But anytime there's something that isn't clicking with the picture, with the image you're trying to create, add more contrast, and it works.
That's good. That's actually a good point. I like that. Because usually when you have a vision of something that goes on the page there, you're kind of, you don't always give yourself flexibility to change, usually. What was an early experience where you learned that language had power?
Wow. Gee, that's another good one. I mean, I think communication in general, that I've always been, since I was a kid, like enamored with visual storytelling. So I think sometimes, let's say like you have a splash page with like no words at all, like that they'll say the image communicates everything. And it's a situation where it's a writer collaborating with an artist. So they're like, where's the words? Where's the writing? And be like, oh, that picture's the writing. You know what I mean? That as human beings, we communicate in like a lot of different ways, and this is a visual medium, and a lot of the writing is me communicating to Ray that like frankly, that like sometimes like with the captions and even the dialogue to some extent, that like I feel kind of, I don't know if guilty is the right word, and like I need to put words in here because I feel bad, like I need to do my part of the job. But a lot of the writing is me, like this, especially because a comic book script, it's just in this situation is me talking to Ray. But at the most, it's like a colorist, a penciler, an inker, so like maybe an editor, maybe 5-6 people, as opposed to a film script has, or a play, like any type of script like that has to be a very specific format, because it's going to be sent to production designers, producers, all kinds of people, and they all need to kind of see the same thing in their head. Yeah. But me and Ray are having a conversation, so the writing is not necessarily always the dialogue. It's me talking to Ray, and that the images are kind of as powerful, and that's kind of the dominant. Or you know what? I was gonna say that's the present day dominant medium, but I mean like cave drawings is a thing. So I guess that the text and the image have always been kind of. I guess that's what separates us from the animal kingdom. That and underpants.
Elephants can paint, man. I don't know about that. I was going to say I have a pretty good example, actually. Something that immediately springs to mind when you're talking about communicating like with image and writing. Think back to 2008 and the Barack Obama Hope poster. I'm still of the opinion that played not insignificant role in getting that man elected. It was just such a powerful image,
What else then from your own creative perspective then?
I think, I'm sorry to interrupt.
I'll have to think about that.
But I think what's interesting is also in the eyes, whether you're doing prose or collaborating with an artist, you're talking like power. And I don't want to get too Alan Moore-ish in terms of like magic and things like that. But the idea of like, magic, you're using words to like create power and bring things to life. That whether it's prose and you're like bringing an image to life in someone's imagination, or in this case, like using words that then Ray brings like an image to life, I know your question kind of speaking more to like words that have been inspirational, that have power and stuff like that, but just the idea of like words then translating into tangible things. And that's kind of like a weird alchemy and magic in and of itself, because that's what magic is, right? We're doing like an incantation, and then Alan Moore prays to a snake god, and that like brings things into the tangible world. But that kind of is comic books also. Like I create a series of phrases. I string together letters and syllables, and through these letters and syllables and some, maybe a comma, a period every once in a while, Ray brings like a tangible thing into this like world. And that's kind of fucking magic.
It's sorcery.
It is a mysterious alchemy, especially, I guess in this situation where I have a great love for artists. I love art. I study art academically, but like, I guess people consider it like writing an art, but I mean art in terms like a craft, like bringing something tangible. It is kind of an alchemy, because like, and then he's doing it on the computer, which I even have less of a grasp of. That there is like a certain amount of like, it's almost like, and I mean, maybe people know how their car works, but I don't. That like you bring your car to the mechanic, like I turn my key and like, oh my God, the internal combustion engine. This is like magic. This is alchemy to me. Much in the same way, what Ray does is like, oh wow, I could draw the head of a Ninja Turtle because that's like an oval, and then like a rectangle for the bandana, and then like a half circle on top. So it's also something I could draw just the head of a Ninja Turtle. But like when he's putting all these panels, like you're saying, like perspective and like rubble and like all these like cityscapes and all, it's alchemy. It's magic,
Nothing I could say would be more beautiful than that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And that's why he's the writer.
Yeah, exactly.
I try to bring my Stanley kind of pitchman huckster carnival barker, because I guess also in terms of the division of labor, and obviously I have a very soft spot for Stan in my heart, but obviously nowadays it's becoming a bit more controversial because kind of the truth of the division of labor and kind of where the credit went. But in terms of like that division of labor, obviously I'm giving Ray more than a plot. I'm not like a Stanley, like, I think we'll have a Galactus today. And then like Ray makes a 3-thing trilogy. And like, we all did this together. But regardless of that, because there is a great division of labor that, at the very least, like when we go on something like this, I could kind of pick up the slack and be like the carnival barker of this whole kind of this whole operation. Excelsior, true believers. Well, I mean, even like I'd say like the line editing, even with like dialogue where it's something that the grammar doesn't have to be perfect because it's people speaking. Like people definitely, and I appreciate like the people that we have that like read it before we send it out. My whole point is that that's after me checking myself, the amount of like edits that get caught. Like, it's not like I'm sending this out blindly. This is drafts later. Like, so editing is all our friends, definitely. Or, I mean, or Ray can also speak to this, I guess, in terms of like him doing the art himself, that I guess if there was a division of labor of like a penciler and inker, that like that things can be caught and that he's kind of editing himself. That he is both penciler, inker, colorist, whereas like a normal comic book process, like a Marvel comic where you have like 3 or 4 people, someone could be like, oh, there's 2 thumbs pointed in the same direction. Humans don't have hands like that. Like Ray is catching it all on his own.
It's happened. I had to redo a couple panels because I was just like, what were you on when you drew this? This is just not right.
I was listening to some comic book YouTubes and they brought up a good point. Some like the more famous, like Rob Liefeld kind of like flubs or like famously like bad kind of art, that he does ink himself a lot in his current art, but some of these images had a different inker, and was the inker like, oh, like screw Rob Liefeld, like I'm not correcting this, like it's going down on the paper as he penciled it.
I will give you a counterpoint.
Sure.
I was just going to say, you wouldn't be talking about it now if you hadn't drawn it that way. So maybe there's something to be said for, quote unquote inaccuracies.
Oh, I think, yeah, some of the famous like comic errors was there like a thing of a marketing thing like that. But also in today's day and age where it's popular, and there are like the Captain America image that's famous, that's like very squirrely. But just to defend Rob Liefeld, because I was like the right age when he was like doing New Mutants and X-Force, that like that art did speak to kids. I wasn't a huge actually image kid because also the better paper stock was weird to me. I'm like, well, why is the paper like glossy? So like the better paper and better inking actually was one of the things that turned me off to image. But I am totally the right age. Jim Lee's X-Men, Rob Liefeld on, Will Portasio on Uncanny. Like I was 8, not 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And like, yeah, people have, and a lot of it's legitimate criticism, but it did connect with people. And like, I think people are missing that context of like, it's like, when I see a Star Wars movie now, I love Star Wars since I was 6 years old. It blew my mind. Well, when I first learned there were multiple Star Wars, that was like one of the most exciting things I saw. Was at the library and like looked in the like, oh my God, there's more than one of these movies. So like when I saw
another one.
And now
when I went to see Rogue One in the theater, I went with my brother-in-law and my little nephew, and I enjoy Rogue One very much. But one of the first things my brother-in-law told me, like, hey Jake, did you like it? What do you think about it? At first I looked down at my little nephew. Did you like it? Like every generation deserves their own stories. And I think whatever you have to say about Rob Liefeld, good, bad, or indifferent, I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of negative things you can say. But that art really connected with people at the time. And also, I guess now as an adult, what I didn't realize, because one of the things I love most about that era of X-Men is the character design was cool, but the art design, like how they drew tech and vehicles. And I guess this is before the internet and before manga was around, but not super and pervasive. And a lot of the anime was anime that was like repurposed, like stuff like Voltron, that anime wasn't as ubiquitous. That's all Appleseed. It's like a mixture of Terminator 2, like James Cameron art design, like Aliens, Terminator 2, and Appleseed. I did not know all of that, like the way they drew tech that I loved in like those X titles. That is 100% now as an adult. That's Appleseed right there. Anyone who loves those comics, the way Wills drew tech as well, I love how they drew tech, but it's 100% they're cribbing off Appleseed. But then now looking back, you're like, oh, because at that age, being like 7-year-old, growing up in like suburbia, like that was totally mind-blowing. But I'm like, now as an adult, like, oh, they got into some, or even like, I think it's even more impressive looking back, the Frank Miller Daredevil, or even later on Ronin, that he was totally cribbing manga influences. That like, how was he getting a hold of that stuff? And like, I think early 80s or even late 70s, like he was getting his hold of like Lone Wolf and Cub, like non-translated, and like kind of getting stuff from that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, we're all doing that. And like, I think what's interesting sometimes is looking back on what Ray and I create is there's definitely intentional homages, like things that influences I want to get down. We have one script where like in the script, like no spoilers, but I'm like, this is like the Old Boy hallway scene. I sent him like a YouTube clip from like the film Old Boy. But there's other things that we get back that like, I'm like, oh, this was like in the deep recesses of my lizard brain. And like, I didn't realize that was a thing. And like, oh, this is totally a thing. Like I see it. Like one of the things I noticed is there's like an old cartoon from the 80s. Is it Bionic 6 or Bionic 7? So like a family of Bionic. It's like a Fantastic Four-esque kind of homage, and they're like a family of, they get bionic powers. And I think I sent Bray like the bad 80s intro, and I'm like, this is definitely totally a thing that is somewhere in my lizard brain that is like leaking onto the page,
Astounding Tales 2, are you doing a Kickstarter campaign, or is this just going to be through your website? Like, what's that game plan?
Yeah, absolutely going to be a Kickstarter campaign. In fact, it was supposed to be a Kickstarter campaign. Right now, it's a little bit delayed. Entirely my fault, but we're going to get there.
Dude, I mean, I wouldn't.
It is.
Please, it happens when it happens, dude. You got to keep your human alive.
Well, I hate not being able to deliver. When we did our first Kickstarter, the book wasn't done. I had to finish the pages, and like that 3 months was just a nightmare for me. So I swore I'm not going to do another one until the book's 99% of the way there. So we're getting there. We've got, everything's inked, most things are flatted, half the book's colored. So it's a couple more weeks away, but we'll get there, and then we will be launching.
Or what was the in the beginning of issue 1 when I was like, oh, it's an old-fashioned scooter thing. What was it? And you like drew an analog, but hoverboard. So like I'm like and I was like, oh, it's like an old school like hoverboard, like the kids roll around on these days. And he thought I meant like an analog hoverboard, like a Marty McFly hoverboard, but with like fans. And he was gracious enough to be like, oh, now I understand what you're talking about when we spoke. But that was definitely like a miscommunication and like old school hoverboard. Halloween, maybe?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We're trying for as early a fall as we can get.
But, also, obviously this is to promote issue 2 and that Kickstarter. But also, if people are interested in issue 0 and 1, they're still floating out there. 0 can be read, I don't want to plug early or whatever, but on Ray's website, you get issue 0. There's places people can view 0 and 1 as well. It's an ongoing, but they're also self-contained-ish, So like you could read totally any of them as its own deal. This is not as dense as like a Claremont X-Men, which is definitely like has a soft spot in my heart. But I do think there is something missing in modern comics, or not missing, but like that you can look things up on the internet that like back in the day where you're like, oh, like this is a copy of like Batman 400, or like better yet, 15 years into Claremont's X-Men run, and you are kind of like scratching your head and putting things together with headcanon and being like, if I only get a few more issues of this, I will understand what's fully happening here. And I think that's part of the joy of like comics, is that kind of like filling in the blanks of like, this has been going on for a while, and like, who are these people, what is happening? And like, I don't know, that's part of the excitement of it. And I think maybe the internet kind of ruined a little bit of that canon is not so clear. Like, canon should be used to benefit you. It shouldn't be like a dogma. These aren't things like from high up top the mount. We're not talking about like the Torah or something like that. This is not the New Testament. So I think a little bit of that headcanon, like for me, when I was a kid, when the words uttering like, I fought with your father in the Clone Wars in Star Wars, like, what are the Clone Wars? Like, to me, it's almost more exciting when there was no Clone War cartoon, and I had to just think of like what a Clone Wars was. And in my head at 6 years old, I imagined Obi-Wan Kenobi, and before you knew, spoiler alert, Darth Vader is Luke's father, that like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker were fighting literal armies of clones. That was my headcanon, that someone created evil clones of the Jedi, and that was the Clone Wars. Or also like when you talk about with friends, like, I heard that Darth Vader like fell into a volcano. And this is what many years before the prequels were even a thing, let's say like the late 80s, early 90s, of like just being like filling in the blanks yourself. And I think that's some of the brilliant writing in Star Wars, is the implied things that make perfect sense, but also you imply there's a lot for you to kind of imply on your own. And also that makes a much bigger universe. When everyone knows each other and everyone's like bumping into each other and every bit of a backstory, it makes it a very tiny universe. But when you say things like, your father and I fought in the Clone Wars, and it's just that line by itself, and then you're moving on to the actual meat and potatoes of the narrative, that makes a universe immense. That makes a universe big. And I think sometimes in our modern storytelling with prequels and explaining every little thing, I think storytellers are forgetting that, and they're making their universes very small. Like finding out that Han Solo's name is because his name is you're a loner, your name is Solo. And also in the same movie, we find out where he gets the Millennium Falcon, why he has a crush on like short, petite brunettes. And like every aspect of his life, he meets Chewbacca, which that part did make me tear up. Like, they're going to be best friends forever. But finding all those things in one story, in 190 minutes, makes your universe super tiny.
Yeah.
And by the way,
how you really
as
feel about that
someone
movie,
who loves the expanded universe and still reads those EU books and has since, when they were coming out, Han Solo is a family name from Corellia. All right. We all know this. I don't know none of this like, oh, you're Solo, so this is like, I think they stole that from like Lord of the Rings, where they're like, if you're a bastard, like you have these like regional like names. No, he has a family. Solo's a family name. That's for another day.
Yeah. We could do an entire episode of just on Star Wars alone. We'll have to.
I got opinions.
I know.
However, though,
do you? I wasn't sure.
However, though, every generation should have their own stories. So if there's some kid out there who's 10 and loves Solo and it's their religion, more power to you. God bless. Like, enjoy your stories. Don't listen to me. I'm an old fart.
Everyone has one person that inspired them on their path to where they are today. Who was that for you?
Well, I guess if it's going to be one person, I think oftentimes like I'll cite kind of people that I don't know personally. And I think there's a litany of those people who really ignited my imagination. But I think too often, like I said, citing people that aren't kind of personal people in my life. So I'm going to say my older sister, Gigi, and for a few reasons. One is now she's kind of retired, but she's a photojournalist that like someone could make a living kind of doing art and creating things and stuff like that. She's 14 years older than me. So kind of the value of art, the value of being an artist. Most people in my family are kind of either like academics or professionals or things like that. She's one of the few people that is like involved in the arts. Not the only person. I have some other family members that are involved in the arts, but kind of close, generationally to me. But the other thing of her being 14 years older than me, and this also ties into my parents maybe being a little lax in their duties of monitoring what I consumed, whether I was with my sister or not. But because I hung out with someone 14 years older than me, like literally when she was in college and we would visit her, my parents would stay in a hotel and I would stay in her dorm with her friends. Or when she graduated college, it wouldn't be uncommon for me to be 8, 10, 12 years old and hanging out in Manhattan or staying over in Manhattan or Brooklyn with her and her friends. So I was around a lot of like older people in terms of the art I consumed, whether it's films, movies, her taking me to comic book stores. One of the first comics I ever bought on my own. I'm not at my house, or I'd show that issue of Uncanny. She took me to this is when you could buy comics off the newsstand. And she also took me, she used to live down the street from St. Mark's Comics. She lived in the Village on St. Mark's and 8th, or on 8th and 2nd Avenue, which is down the street from St. Mark's Comics. It was a famous New York City comic book store, which now is in Brooklyn, I guess. But it's still awesome. It's still called St. Mark's. So if people are visiting New York City, I highly encourage you to go to St. Mark's Comics. And used to take me there to buy comic books and also Marvel and X-Men trading cards, because I'm of the right age when those were really popular. So yeah, my sister for exposing me. And then also that has to do with also my academic career in film theory, because even as a kid, like seeing independent films, seeing silent films, seeing films that weren't necessarily meant for children. She's the one who took me to see Terminator 2 when I was 6, and maybe I think Jurassic Park when I was like 8 or 10. And but then also, in terms of like, I definitely recognize my diet of films was different than all my friends for 2 reasons when I was little. One is when I was super little, that all like the independent films that were like nominated for Best Picture, like, oh, I saw these all in theaters. I saw a Train Spotting. I saw this. I saw that when I was a kid. And the other thing is, when I was maybe 12, 13, the age you're having sleepovers with friends. This is when Blockbuster still existed. My friends are like, oh, rent some movies and when on your way over. And try to think of all the films I got, but one of them, I'm still, despite controversy, I'm still a huge Woody Allen fan. And Everything You Ever Want to Know About Sex But Are Afraid to Ask, which is hysterical if no one's ever seen it. It is a very, very funny film. But I brought this to my friends, along with some other films. I don't remember the other ones, but I guess similar kind of indie films, different films, that 12-year-olds wouldn't normally be watching. And they're like, what is this? And we even tried to watch it, and they turned it off. They're like, what are you doing? Like, you're not renting films again. Like, but also later on in our mid-20s, I'm still friends with all my childhood friends. One of my buddies, we were at a barbecue, was talking about how funny that film is, Everything You Ever Want to Know About Sex But Were Afraid to Ask. And I called him out on it. I'm like, you were at that sleepover when we were like 12 or 13 and did not like that movie. And he's like, yeah, because we were 12. I'm like, no shit. But if anyone that is a very funny movie. There's bestiality. There's a giant boob, like a giant, atomic monster sized breast. It's a great film. There's sperm that like fly out of they're parachutists or whatever. It's a good time, so I highly recommend it. But yeah, I guess my sister for just exposing me to art and music and encouraging. She's not a comic book person herself, encouraging and buying me comics and stuff like that.
Well, I'm going to do similar, where I could give you a list of artists who I admire and am inspired by, Jeff Smith, Dave Gibbons, Frank Frazetta, so on and so forth. But really, the answer is the man who took a chance on me when I was 16 as a young artist and hired me on to do caricatures with no experience, Scott Van Eck. And he's an incredible airbrush artist, an incredible caricaturist. He does a little bit of comics, but he doesn't really understand how the internet works, so you're never going to see any of them. But he's just truly an inspiration, truly a wonderful talent. And he's the only man I know who can insult you to your face and everyone will laugh. I don't know how he does it. Everyone's laughing and he's like, oh, you're the ugliest guy I've ever seen. It's amazing.
I think also in terms of male camaraderie, and I tried explaining this to my nephew a few years ago. Like, if you're really close friends, and this was with, I think, guy friends,
Yeah.
like you could tell by how close a group of like male friends are by how awful the things they are saying are to each other. The more awful, the more you're like, oh, these people are very close friends, you know. Or
No, but he's doing this to strangers. That's the thing. You have to understand
Even
the
better.
people who sit down and are our customers and are paying us money, and he'll sit there and insult them to their faces, and they will love it.
From a professional standpoint, you are both very successful as a writer and an artist, and you have been doing this for a number of years together. And I can't wait to see issue 2 of Astounding Tales, and I can't wait to see the other issues as well whenever those come out. So professionally, you're successful in that regard. Do you consider yourselves personally successful?
Ooh, that is a heck of a question.
he
I
really
would
fires
like
the
to
tough
think
ones at you, man. Yeah, hit the fastballs.
You're asking me to evaluate both my ego and what I've done in the past. It's hard to call myself a complete success because obviously I'm not working full time doing what I love anymore. But I recognize a lot of people are in that situation. It's not unique to me. So I think I'm successful in the sense that I do get to do what I enjoy and I am able to put it out there for people to see. So yeah, in that respect, yes.
Well, I do also have a little bit of a background in athletics. I'm a bit of a Long Island stereotype in that I grew up playing lacrosse and played it in high school, college, and then coached high school and college lacrosse. I'm also I love Billy Joel. I'm all the Long Island stereotypes. Until I grew up, I didn't realize people didn't learn Billy Joel songs in elementary school if you didn't grow up in Long Island, in like music class. But in terms of success, like I said, going back to athletics, I borrow the John Wooden definition of success. That did you do the best you can with the ability you're given, that like if you're a football team and you're like a high school football team and you go play like the Dallas Cowboys or New York Giants, like your measure of success probably shouldn't be the scoreboard because you're in high school and they're NFL players. Like you have no chance of winning. Like what's going to be can you play the best that you can play? Did you do everything to live up to your potential? So in terms of like the individual scripts, I think the individual comics are, I would say, a success. So in terms of like my collaboration with Ray, I don't know either of us, we would like to be more quote unquote financially successful, but in terms of like the product itself, the actual like art object, I think they are successful. I would say though, in terms of as I'm getting older, I'm 40. I'm at 40 years. I'm the same age as Return of the Jedi. So, I'm getting up there that like, if I spontaneously combusted like today, or I got like ran over by a bus in terms of like the volume of work I've created, I don't know if I would consider myself a success in terms of that. I would like to have a greater kind of canon of work, both academic nonfiction work and kind of fiction work. At this age, I would like to have a greater, I think, in that sense, again, to be frank and kind of very self-aware, I don't think in that sense that, to kind of on the other side of that coin, sometimes you hear about artists that like something happens to them and it's tragic. And then they go look in terms of their house and see all these like unfinished works. I think that I wish I could remember the documentary. There was one recently about a photographer that was she worked in childcare and two of the kids she nannied end up being filmmakers. And like later on, they found all her photos and they had people in the art world evaluate the photos and that she's like a world-class photographer that like no one ever heard of till like, they unearthed all her stuff when she died. That like, if that happened to me, I'm not saying the work is bad. Like I said, I think the work Ray and I have created is definitely a success, but in terms of like volume of work, that they're not going to find like trunks of materials of like, there's all these novels here. So in terms of like, not necessarily breadth, but just kind of volume of work, actual amount. No one gets off this ride alive. No one lasts. So I think I would have liked, I think I should create more amounts of work, whether, especially, in terms like prose, things that like, I don't depend on someone to collaborate with. And that also goes for non-academic, or rather academic work and nonfiction work. There is like a journal article about Rambo 3 and foreign policy and like history that I've been working on since like the beginning of the summer that like I need to complete and like submit to journals. So hopefully people will let me into a PhD program. Please let me into a PhD program. If you're listening anywhere out there, I applied, no one let me in. So I'd say in some ways, I think very much a success. In other ways, I think, like Ray's saying, you gotta be a little humble in these things. And, I want to answer your question kind of honestly and kind of be kind of self-aware about these things,
The reverse of success is failure. How do you deal with your failures?
In terms of failure, well, two things, going back to John Wooden, the Wizard of Westwood. So I know this is a comic book theme thing, but I guess also nowadays, I don't want to be too stereotypical. I don't think it was like when I was a kid and like I had to explain to my football team like what the X-Men were because like the movies were coming out. So I think there's a lot of people who play sports who are into sci-fi and comics and fantasy and vice versa. But for those of you who are not, this is another Wooden quote, and he's a legendary college basketball coach for UCLA, that don't be afraid of failure or don't be afraid of mistakes. A doer makes mistakes. So in terms of like failure, that means like you're trying stuff. So like not all of it's going to be successful. And also, frankly, like if all your stuff, like if it never fails, like you're probably not trying new things. You're probably not taking risks. So to go to like a comic book example, and someone who was a big part of my youth, who's extremely successful kind of financially, like someone like Jim Lee, I don't think like he doesn't take a lot of chances. Like I think stylistically, I think his art's cool. But like, I don't know if he's grown a tremendous amount. I mean, Ray could speak to that better because, I'm not an artist, but like, to me, it doesn't seem like it hasn't evolved that much. It's still kind of very a similar style. And like, I think this speaks to him as being a smart businessman, Jim Lee, but like, and like knows what's marketable. I think he's a brilliant businessman in that regard. But I don't think his art takes a lot of chances. On the other side of the coin, if you look at like Bill Sienkiewicz on his Moon Knight run, where he's kind of doing like a Neil Adams thing, and then he did like his New Mutants thing, and like the part of it, Chris Claremont being on board and like empowering him and going, I think it was Jim Shooter at the time was the editor, being like, this is what New Mutants is going to look like. Like that's a chance. Like that's someone taking a chance. So yeah, like that, you kind of, when you take a chance, like there was a time in basketball where people didn't take a jump shot. That was kind of a very lateral, it wasn't a vertical game. And that like, if you took a jump shot, someone would like take your knees out. Or the forward pass in football. Like these were a time like someone's like, dude, throw the ball fucking forward. Like, what are you, nuts? Like that there's times, where you're going to totally, or modern basketball where everyone's shooting threes. There was a time when that was strategically like a very weird thing. So, taking a chance, or like high concept films, like something like Jaws or Star Wars. There was a time when that wasn't a thing. And then the theater going to the late 70s very much into the 80s, 90s, high concept films became a thing. But there was a time when that like wasn't a thing. Or, sinking $200 million into a comic book film. There was a time when that wasn't a thing, So yeah, like when you're kind of doing, that's kind of when you push the ball forward is kind of when you're taking chances. So you may fall on your face, if you make a movie about space wizards and giant like space dogs that like can fly the plane, like there's a chance that you fall on your face, but that's when the cool shit happens too. So don't be afraid to and I guess that plays into like humility and ego and stuff, that like don't let your decisions be ruled by ego, because that's when you're going to be kind of afraid to kind of make mistakes and kind of fuck up.
Well, I was going to say, first things first, I try to make it a point not to critique anyone's art unless they ask me to. So I've got nothing to say about Jim Lee. Okay. But he hasn't sent me a memo yet. How do you deal with failure? other than with crippling amounts of Dr. Pepper and snacks and food.
Self-flagellation.
Yeah, exactly. I find it hard not to move forward even when I do fail, just because this particular thing that I do, I enjoy so much. Enjoy is not even the right word. I feel compelled to do it. So even if something doesn't work out, or if I don't, see the returns on something that I'd hoped I'd see, I'm still going to do it. Even if I was doing this in a black hole with no one who would ever see it, this is still what I would do. So I guess it's just pure momentum at this point.
The young generation is looking at your work and they're becoming inspired but creative in their own way. And the fact that you have the young generation with you and the fact that you're inspiring them in some way, shape, or form, maybe they're going to become creative in some way, shape, or form in the future. How can they inspire the generation that follows them?
That is an incredible question. I am always humbled when someone younger comes up to me, or their parents come up to me and tell them that they love drawing and they see what I do and they feel greatly inspired by it. And I would say that the way they can inspire others as they go on is to just do that same thing. Just show people what you're doing, even if you don't feel it's perfect, even if you don't, think that it's something someone will enjoy. There is someone out there who is going to like it. So you should, not be afraid to put it out there. And yeah, you will get some criticism, but you have to be able to shrug it off and move forward, and, just don't be afraid.
Well, I think also, especially regarding artists, because it really pains me when sometimes I hear those with parents like, oh, you can never support yourself as an artist. You never get a job as an artist. And I mean, maybe that isn't true. That could be true in terms of like fine arts. It could be tough to find, make a living and be like, I'm going to be an oil painter. But in terms of like literally being an artist as your vocation, that like everything is designed by somebody. Like literally everything in our world, every product, whether it's like your coffee maker, your phone, your car, like everything in this house, aside from the Jack Kirby collage, I'm sitting in a house right now. Every product in this house is designed by somebody. So in terms of like, if someone wants art as their vocation, that is certainly a very realistic thing. Now, like if it's like, oh, I want to make my living specifically being like a comic book artist, you might have varying degrees of success. And it's like the same thing if I want to be like a rock musician or whatever. But like if you're like literally I want to, especially when someone's talking to children like that, being like, oh, you can never find a job in the arts. Now, depending what your job is and like what type of expression you have to do and stuff like that, that varies. But if you just, in a very literal sense, I want to be paid to do art as a vocation, that is a very realistic thing and not something you should discourage a kid from. Now, I say that as not having a kid, but I feel really bad when I hear, I've been in several situations where I hear adults telling that to children, and I think it's terrible to kind of to dissuade a child from being involved in the arts or, loving the arts in any way. I think it's a shame in our society and our culture that in terms of the cost of education, that we really social engineer people to going into avenues of education that just translate into dollars and cents. That education is a wonderful thing. Intellectual curiosity is a wonderful thing. And the arts are a wonderful thing, and we should never dissuade a kid from having an interest in any of those things.
Very inspirational. I love that. The answers from both of you. That works out very well. If your life was a comic book, what would its title be, and what would its soundtrack be?
So I think this is interesting because I think about this a lot, like the soundtrack I'm listening to, that music definitely... I'm a very visual thinker, so even music makes me think about images. I guess right now I got a lust for life, like Iggy Pop says. But probably like a Fish or Grateful Dead show would be the soundtrack, because that's why I'm in Saratoga right now, is for Fish added 2 shows last minute for Vermont flood relief. So I'm taking part in a fundraiser, and I got my Grateful Dead shirt on just coincidentally. And then comic, Dark Knight Returns, because even though I'm an old man, I'm still at it. And I guess in the scenario, is Ray my Carrie Kelly? I don't know. Where it's like, it's not time to die yet, old man. We still got more work to do.
So what would the title of your comic be then for your life?
So if there was a comic about my life, it wouldn't actually be about me. It would be about my daughter, because she's the star of everything. And it would be called My Child is a Maniac and I Love Her. And the entire soundtrack would be heavy metal.
Very good. All right. Well, I do hate to say it, Jake and Ray, but that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. I want to thank you both so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for your time. Please.
An absolute pleasure. We really appreciate it.
Before I let you both go, where can we find you? How can we support you? Of course, where is Astounding Tales and anything else you both would like to promote?
Well, I guess the biggest thing is, if you haven't seen any of our work, check out Ray's website. And then also, so it's funnyfigs.com, and then funnyfigs.com/astounding. You can see issue 0 for free. Astounding Comics is on the social, and I'm _Jake_Cohen on Instagram. And the link tree on there will take you to Ray's stuff, to Astounding Tales stuff. And I think that's kind of the easiest way to find us.
Yeah. So like he said, I am Funny Figs on all the things that matter on the internet. I'm a little less on Twitter these days, but Blue Sky, Instagram, Facebook, all of those. Yes, X, sorry. And while there is a preview of the comic available on my website, I will also just say, for the record, you can also go check it out on Global Comics. We have it uploaded there as well, if you want to get a little taste of what we're doing.
Good stuff. Well, like I said, that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talk. You can, of course, find this interview and 1,000+ others on our website, tgtmedia.com, or twogeekstalking.com. That's TWO, not the number 2. Different website you don't want to go to. But because that website's going through a revamp for the past 10 years or so, you can find it on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/TGTmedia. The podcast is back after 12 or so years. You can find that at twogeekstalking.podbean.com, or just search for Two Geeks Talking wherever you get your podcasts. And as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to help bring that out. Thanks for listening and watching on Two Geeks Talking.